I'm the founder of a company called Adopt and Embrace, and I'm based in Brisbane in Australia. It's currently 7 p.m. where I am now, so I'm just finishing up my Thursday. So good morning to everyone in the Northern Hemisphere and in Europe, which I'm assuming most of you are today. Today's session is one that I've delivered a couple of times over the last couple of months, but I think it's an important one for us to all to think about and reflect on. As we think about work and like working from home and working from like children's bedrooms, like we just heard in the previous session, like delivering sessions from our kids' bedrooms and from our home offices and from other places, as the COVID pandemic carries on ultimately, and how do we best manage the way that we balance work and life when work really is in the middle of our lives a lot of the time. So today's session is really focused on how do we move towards that new normal? Like it's almost a cliched phrase that we're all using now, that new normal, as the world kind of starts to recover from the pandemic and we start to go back into the ways that we used to work to some extent, the traditional offices or the traditional workplaces that we used to work from quite often. So how can we think about work-life borders? How do we think about how we balance work and life when we're trying to juggle everything all at once and be really great parents or really great employees or really great family members or carers or things like that as well? So within this session, what we're going to talk about is not only some of the philosophies behind managing those work-life borders and how you can keep them under control and make them work for you, but we'll also talk about how you can use tools like Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 and other aspects of the platform to help you manage that as well. So you put that technology to great use to help you get along the way as well. During the session today, there's a few interactive elements to it. Originally, I was going to say pop open the chat and type in your answers to that. But in the case of this session here, because we can't use the chat, what I'd love you to do when we get to those interactive elements is, if you've got a comment or you've got a perspective you want to share with the audience, please just raise your hand and I'll throw the microphone to you for 30 seconds or so, and you can kind of explain your answer to us. There's about 2 or 3 times we'll do that during the session today. For those of you that are on Twitter, you can find me at Paul Woods. If you want to kind of follow along, if you like what you hear today and you want to get more out of it, or you want to engage and ask more questions, please feel free to ask me on Twitter during the session, and I'll be more than happy to answer them as we after the session later this morning, your time. One thing before we get into it, a lot of the things that I'll talk about today are grounded in academic research. So it's not just philosophy. Like when the pandemic first started, we saw lots of blog posts which are like how to work best at home, 5 top tips to set up your home office for productivity, and all those kinds of things. What I kind of reinforce is a lot of what we'll talk about today is really grounded in research, and particularly some of the master's research I've been doing over the past 8 years or so with the Queensland University of Technology here in Australia. So if you really want to dive deep into any of this stuff and get right into the content, there's a 140 page thesis that you can fall asleep reading if you want to, but you can get a lot more of the detail within this as well around technology-enabled mobile work and the porosity of work-life borders. And then one final thing, some of you may have seen it, but recently we just published a book on Microsoft Teams called Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams. And within this book, we talk a little bit about what we're talking about today in terms of how you can make Teams work for you to help manage those work-life borders as well. So with that, let's get into the agenda for the session today. The first thing we're going to talk about is both the benefits and the consequences of distributed work. A lot of us are in this mode at the moment. We are kind of experiencing distributed work at the moment. Some of us are back in the office, some of us are working from home. What have been the benefits of being forced to work from home? But what are some of the consequences that we might not have considered that we need to think about in this new way of working? We'll spend some time defining.
Can I just shoot in? You have like the meeting now on top of your slides.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So if you can move that out, I think it would be more beautiful.
There we go.
Awesome. Much perfect. Thank you. Go ahead.
No worries at all. Thank you. We'll talk about defining work-life borders and give you some language that you can use to think about these things and communicate these things with your employer or with your employees. We'll talk about how we transition across the borders between work and life, and some of the tactics that we can use to do that. And then finally, we'll talk about tips and tactics that we can implement within Microsoft 365 so we can be in control and we can manage those borders to make them work for us as individuals and us as team members and us as family members and things like that. So with that, the first activity, again, I would have used the chat, but we'll just use that raise hand feature now if anyone's got any perspectives on this. But what I'd love to hear from one or two of you in the audience is, what are some of the benefits you've found from having to work from home sometime over the last 3 or 4 months as the pandemic has spread? Have there been some things that you've found surprising that you didn't think would be a benefit, or things that are really obviously benefits, and you just kind of reinforce that since working from home? So does anyone want to raise their hand and kind of share what some of the benefits they've found of distributed work or working from home have been? That's okay if no one wants to talk about it. I've got a slide with some examples of the ones that I thought here as well. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll talk about some of the benefits that I've absolutely found, and I know a lot of other people have found as well. So for me, some of the benefits have been something that I'm sure we're all familiar with. It's the 45-second commute from bed or from the kitchen to the home office. So in a lot of cities, the traffic and the commute time to get into a workplace could be half an hour, could be 40 minutes, could be over an hour in some cases each way. So the fact that we're getting in some cases 2 hours extra a day back into our work days, that's a really positive thing. It means we can either sleep better, we can have more time to eat better, we can put more focus into our family lives as well. But it also gives us the opportunity to maybe work a bit more too, or maybe get some stuff done if we need to do that as well. I think it absolutely allows us to better balance both our professional goals, so hitting our KPIs and getting our bonuses and achieving what we need to do in our work, but also achieve our personal goals as well. The old school, how do we get our lunch breaks back? How do we get out of the office on time that we used to have to think about when we're in a physical workspace? We have much better control over those things now and balancing those two aspects of our lives. We absolutely can see a reduction on the impact on the environment of the way that we work. If you're not getting in a car and hopping into work, you're not catching a train to get into the office, you're not flying on a plane to go somewhere. These are all activities, and transportation is a pretty significant contributor to greenhouse emissions. We ran the numbers on our business just the other day in terms of air travel alone. So our biggest carbon contributor by a long way is air travel. It's about 90% of our carbon impact as a business. And we just saw a reduction of 56% in our carbon emissions caused by air travel, just because we haven't been able to get on planes and do work with customers that we'd traditionally do, or fly to the United States for conferences and things like that. So we can see definitely as a benefit there in terms of our overall impact on the environment. And then finally, there's the ability for us to focus. So we've got a little bit more time in the day. We're away from distractions that we might traditionally have in the office. That allows us to spend some really quality focused time on work and go deep into work as well. So I think there's lots of great benefits there, and I think there's other benefits that I'm sure we could all think of if we wanted to share them as well. But on the flip side of that, there's benefits, but there's also consequences of work. Now, again, if I'll go through the list of consequences here that I've got in a second, but if you've got any other ideas of consequences, please feel free to raise your hand, and we can talk about them after I go through this list as well. And I think there's 4 things we need to consider that we probably need to either think about or try and reduce the risk of as we continue to engage in sustained remote work or work from home as well. And the 4 things are work intensification, extensification, disconnection from social networks in the office, additional costs of actually running offices from home, and then the weakening borders between work and life. So let's talk about each one of those individually. When we talk about work intensification and extensification, I'm sure you're all familiar with this experience yourselves. When we've been working from home, we've always had this urge to work harder to some extent, particularly before COVID. If you did work from home, if an employer gave you the flexibility to work from anywhere, there was almost like this implied social contract that meant that you'd put a little bit extra in just to prove that you're working harder because you're working from home. And so we find a lot of people that work from home will intensify their work by 10 or 15% just because of that implication that that you're giving flexibility for me to keep my job and work flexibly at the time. The other thing we find with work from home, and we've seen this a lot during the pandemic, is work extensification. So the increase in work hours that people do. Because we don't have that traditional commute where we go into the office, or the commute where we come home from the office, that kind of breaks up our day. The line kind of blurs between our start times and finish times in terms of work. And I know I myself have found myself doing work, and you get into the zone, and normally you might finish at 5:30 p.m. or 6 p.m. at night, but then it's 7 o'clock, all of a sudden, and you've kind of done an extra hour of work just because you haven't had to go catch a bus or catch a train or or leave the office. So definitely a consequence is a lot of people actually working a lot harder. And particularly if you're on video calls all day, that harder work and that more intense work is draining us a lot more as well, which is another thing we could talk about. Second one is that disconnection from social networks in the office. This is a really interesting one to think about in terms of your career progression and how you build an identity at work and how you position yourself for promotion and things like that. A lot of the time, a lot of those promotions and other activities really relate to the strong social networks and the strong social capital that you have within your office. So if you're not actively visible in an office and you're not actively being seen to be doing certainly some of the right things and helping the company or the team go in the right direction, there's a chance you could potentially fall into the shadows and not be recognized for the great work that you're doing. So again, working in a distributed way, working from home, that disconnection from those social networks and the reduction in your social capital can have an impact on your opportunities for promotion down the track or other potential roles within a business. I think all of us have borne the additional costs of having to work from home. So I don't know if you've had an electricity bill recently, but our last electricity bill was certainly a lot higher than it usually is because we've had a lot more of the computers at home because I've been working at home, my wife's been working from home, our children have been doing school from home. There's additional costs with that, additional costs with setting up additional workstations that you might have only had one workstation in your house before everyone had to work from home, and all of a sudden you've got 2.5, like two kind of permanent ones and kind of half set up in the kitchen for the kids or things like that. So there's definitely additional costs that a lot of individuals have borne, and their employers haven't paid for those things as well. And then finally, when work is literally right next door to the kitchen or within the kitchen, there's definitely a blurring of those lines between work and life. And whether you're a lot like me, where it's very easy just to walk to the fridge now to get a snack or something like that to go back into work, you kind of flip between work and life very quickly like that. If you have children that love to come into the office as they come home from school and in a really positive way interrupt your work, but still interrupt your work to some extent, there's really a lot of opportunities here for to lose control of that work-life border and the potential for it not to work for you and not to work for your family as well. So some interesting consequences to think of there. Does anyone have any other consequences they've identified that they want to share before we move on in the presentation? No, that's all good. We'll keep going on. So let's talk about work-life borders and again, talk about the language we can use to define the borders between our work lives and our non-work lives. Now, if you look at some of the academic literature, there's a great paper by Clark from around the year 2000. And it's a paper called Work-Family Border Theory. And it defines those borders between work and life in 3 different ways. There's a physical border between work and non-work or work and family. There's a temporal border between work and non-work or work and family. And there's a psychological border between the 3. So it's not just one single work-life border, but there's nuance to this. We can think about it in a much more detailed way. And so let's have a think about those 3 borders for now and think about what that means for us. So we look at the physical border. Now here's a great example of a really weak physical border, and that's an open door. So in a traditional workplace, if you think about it in a pre-COVID world, the physical border of your workspace is, it's the glass doors that slide open when you walk into the office in the morning. Like you've crossed into the physical workplace, you've crossed that physical border into the workplace. So it's really obvious when you're at work. But when you're at home, you don't necessarily have that physical border around your workplace. So things like, doors on offices or doors, in this case here, this was a door into our garage where I had a temporary office set up for some time. These doors absolutely can serve as the physical border within the space that you're operating in your home or in your cottage or in your guest house or wherever you're working from. So how do we strengthen the physical border in this case? Well, in this case, it's kind of simple. We just close the door. Simply the process of closing the door can send a signal to our families to say, hey, I'm in work mode. Here is a physical border that I'm placing around my workspace to make sure that I have the concentration and I can focus on the work that I need to do. One of the things to consider when you're setting yourself up for work from home sustainably over a long term is picking a space where you do have some control over a physical border like this. So having a door you can close. If you're working from a common area in your house or the kitchen table, you have complete loss of control of the physical border in your work in your workspace, and that can make a big impact in terms of your focus and performance and things like that. So physical borders can be doors. It could be as simple as a curtain, or it could be going from your house where you are to a shed in the backyard. Like it's a structure, or it's some kind of physical artifact that creates this boundary or this border between that workspace and the non-workspace in your life. Next one is temporal borders, and think of this a bit as time, like the time of day that you work. So there are some people that have very strong temporal borders. So for example, you might work in a manufacturing plant and there's a whistle that goes off at 9 o'clock in the morning when the shift starts, and there's a whistle that goes off at 4:30 in the afternoon when your shift finishes. And that's a really, really strong temporal border. The time that you work is absolutely dictated to you by your employer, and then you don't have to necessarily think about work or do any work outside of those hours because it's structured like that. But for many of us that are in information technology or knowledge work or managers in businesses, we absolutely have an opportunity here to have a very weak temporal border where we can pick our own hours and choose the hours that potentially work for us. And that can sometimes get out of control. I know at the height of the pandemic, I personally was sleeping in a little bit more than I should have. And that I had a very weak border at the start of the day, and it was kind of wishy-washy as to when I'd actually start work. And it kind of blurred the lines between work and life to some extent at that time as well. So thinking about the time of day we work. Now, again, having a weak temporal border isn't necessarily a bad thing. We'll get to that in a second. But it definitely means you've got to think about how you manage the strength of that border to make it work for you and the work that you're doing as well. So the stronger temporal border I talked about earlier is, again, having that really clear structure in your workday and having really clear start times and finish times. And then finally, let's talk about the psychological border. This is really like when you think about work. I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of examples of late nights when I've lay in bed thinking about work, and I can't get work out of my head. Or you might be at a family barbecue, and then the phone that's in your pocket, a little notification goes off, and it's a work email that's come in, even though it's a Sunday afternoon. And that's kind of triggered you to think about work instead of thinking about the family or the friends that you're having at the barbecue or at the family dinner that you have at the time. So we have this psychological border, and one of the biggest things that weakens the psychological border is that mobile phone in your pocket. And there's definitely things we can do to strengthen that border, to reduce the likelihood of you of thinking about work when you don't want to think about work as well. And again, some tips and techniques we'll talk about in Microsoft Teams in a second to make that work for you too. So a weak psychological border is having your phone in the pocket all the time, always looking at your apps, always looking at the notifications, responding to every notification that comes up on your phone. A stronger psychological border is when you create space and time where you have an opportunity to clear your mind and not think about work at all. So locking your phone in a drawer, getting away from your desk for a bit, and engaging in an activity that is clearly not work related, kind of adding some ritual to your life almost to some extent to make sure you can focus on the things that you want to focus on at the time. Now, some interesting things here we can think about. So it's quite easy for us, particularly now, to transition across those borders between work and life. And there's definitely some rituals that can help you maintain the strength of those borders in terms of the things you can do around work and like getting ready for work and transitioning out of family time or non-work time into work time and vice versa. So some activities that we see from the literature, but I've heard a lot of people do this as well, is when you actively dress for work. So when you get up in the morning, you're not really in work mode until you put a suit and tie on. And even though if you're just going into your home office, you're still dressing for work as well. I've been on a couple of video calls recently where someone was wearing a full 3-piece suit on a video call, even though they were working from their home, because that was how they got into the work mode and how they they maintained the strength of that. And then when they got out of the suit at the end of the day, that was in their family time, that was in their non-work time. They can kind of control it in that way. You have the opportunity, for example, at the end of your day to, if you physically turn off the light and close the door to your office, that's a small ritual you can say, look, I've turned off the light on the work day, and now I'm going into my non-work time. I've closed the door. I'm not going to go back into the office to engage in work in any sense of imagination. And one of my favorite ones I've seen is there's actually people that have, at the start of their workday, at the end of their workday, still tried to reimagine their commute. They'll actually get into the car, go for a drive for 5 minutes, go get their coffee and come back to the house or go for a drive and listen to a podcast for 15 minutes and come back to their house, and then just go back to work in their office, because they still wanted that structure of the commute to be the signal as they transition from work to non-work as well. Sometimes when you don't have these transition rituals, sometimes you can miss out on certain things, or maybe there's been plenty of people that forget to brush their teeth and get straight into work in the morning, potentially have a shower and things like that. Other rituals you could put in place too. So how do we think about controlling border strength with Microsoft 365? Again, a lot of us would be using Microsoft 365 in our workplaces. A lot of us would be using it for within our teams and encouraging people within our teams to use this technology. So how do we make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success? So Microsoft 365 actually supports our efforts to maintain this border strength and allow us to control this border strength, as well as potentially not become this Trojan horse that actually erodes the strength from those borders. And I think there's a few different things we can talk about here. So we can use Microsoft 365 to maintain border strength. We can also use it to maintain or build that social capital that we talked about earlier, so we can just be visible and recognized for our work within the workplace. And we can also use it to manage the expectations of others. And one of the key things that came out of the research that we did was that the number one way to make sure that you can balance the needs of work and family and work and life when you're working in a distributed way actually has nothing to do with technology, and it's got 100% to do with how you manage your expectations with your manager, or if you are a manager, it's with your direct reports, and how you manage expectations with your family and other people that are in that space. So we'll talk about how we can do those three things with Microsoft 365. Now, again, I know not too much interaction so far, but if you have any ideas in terms of how you could use Microsoft 365, or how you are already using Microsoft 365 to better control your work-life borders at the moment, I'd love for you to put up your hand and hear from you in terms of some of the examples you might have. But I'll keep going along. If you've got any examples, please feel free to put your hand up and we can talk about them as well. So first things first, Microsoft 365 gives us a great opportunity to work from anywhere, right? So as long as we have a sniff of an internet connection, we can engage in work with Microsoft 365, whether it's on our phone, whether it's on our Surface devices or on our laptops or whatever. So when you're thinking about that flexible work, you want to make sure, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we can take advantage of that flexibility where we can locate our work anywhere thanks to the power of Office 365 in the cloud. But we want to make sure we're locating that work in a place where we can have that stronger physical border. So making sure you pick a place to work, we can have that permanent, as permanent as possible structure, whether it's a wall or a door, to allow you to, lock off the physical border of your work as well. So again, using the flexibility of being able to work from anywhere and picking the right space to work in the first place. The second thing is to really help maintain border strength. And I know a lot of us would have experienced video call overwhelm and back-to-back video calls all throughout the days, and when a lot of people originally transitioned to work in the pandemic. One of the things you can do is actually try and reduce the amount of video calls that you do. And this might seem a little bit back to front, but hear me out for a second. One of the philosophies, one of the rules that we've found to have a really big impact on the energy of our teams and the way that we engage with each other is by reducing the amount of meetings we have as much as possible, but maximizing the impact of every meeting that we have. So if we can get through a week with only 2 or 3 meetings, or 4 meetings at a stretch, that's a really good week, because we've been able to give ourselves time to actually do work. And when we have met those 3 or 4 times, it's been a really rich, interactive, expressive experience for everyone, so we can remain connected and trusting each other through the interactions using video and other features of the products. But the only way to do that, the only way to minimize those number of meetings that we have, is to do things a little bit differently. So instead of just engaging in a synchronous way, like where we have to have everyone on a meeting at the same time and talking about things, how can we engage asynchronously first? How can we use things like text, whether it be a Teams message, whether it be a Yammer post in a community, or email if you really have to. But how can we have these text-based conversations or exchanges first before we get into a meeting? So if you have to share information, you're going to share a presentation, sometimes sharing that information before the meeting, so you can focus on the really important stuff when you're actually meeting together as a group, is a great tactic you can use to minimize the amount of time you have to spend on a video call, but maximize the impact of those video calls. I'm not sure if you've had lots of conversations or you've had experiences like this yourself, but we've talked to many chief information officers or other, IT managers who say, look, 3/4 of our team meeting every week or 3/4 of our governance meeting every week for a particular process is just people sharing information, and we're not spending a lot of time in conversation actually pulling things apart and really understanding the real impact of these things. So if you can share all that information before the meeting, we can have a lot more time dedicated to the real important work that we need to do as a group within that conversation. So try and use the technology to share things first, either it's sharing files within Teams, sharing conversations within Teams, but making sure that you can articulate what you want to talk about within the meeting in a way that allows people to engage when they want to as well. One of the benefits of doing this too is it allows your team or the people that you're engaging with to pick the right time in their day to engage in this conversation as well. So just because you wanted to put it in at 11 o'clock in your calendar because that's why it worked for you, it may not work well for other people that are trying to work from home and balance looking after their kids and balance other priorities they have in their home lives as well. But text gives us that flexibility to engage when it works for everyone, not just a few people within the team. One other thing you can do, for those of you in particular that use Teams on your phones, there's some great tools within the mobile app in Teams to help you put some really add some strength to that temporal or that psychological border within work and life as well. So if you haven't used the quiet hours feature, again, it's available within the Teams mobile app, where you can set standard times between the start of your workday and the end of your workday when you want to receive notifications from Teams. And any other time outside of that, you're not going to see any notifications go off on your mobile phone. So especially if you're working in an organization across multiple time zones, or you have peers that like to work late at night and maybe notifying you in messages late at night and things like that. And if you've got your phone beside your bed, which is probably the one of the more horrible ways you can weaken a border between work and life, this quiet hours feature can absolutely get control over your day as well. The interesting thing with quiet hours is not just the quiet hours, but you actually set quiet days as well. So you can say, I don't want any notifications on the weekend. You can set the quiet days so you don't get any notifications at all during your weekends as well, which I definitely recommend you do if you want to kind of get control of your weekend and it's focused on your family or friends or your own hobbies and pursuits that you want to do during your downtime as well. Another thing you can do if you need to quickly maintain border strength in a digital world, one of the easiest ways you can do to cut yourself off from the digital workplace that you work in is just by using flight mode on your mobile phone. So if you just want to kind of disconnect from the office for a couple of hours and sure no one can get through to you so you can focus on work or focus on family, just throw your phone into flight mode, and that basically creates this it basically cuts the digital connection between you and your work as well. Again, if you're feeling overwhelmed or you need to focus on your family for a little bit of time, this trick is a really easy way just to shut everything off, and then you can re-engage in work when you want to re-engage in work as well, just by turning flight mode off on your mobile device. Another one here, again, managing that psychological border. Notifications can be completely overwhelming for a lot of people, and a lot of people have different perspectives on what the right number of notifications is. For me personally, I try and turn off as many notifications as possible because I have a bit of a philosophy that I want to control when I focus on work, and I don't want other people's priorities or other people's interpretations of what is urgent impact how I manage my workload throughout the day. So by turning notifications off, that means I'm not getting drawn into the urgent things of other people, and I can still focus and make considered decisions in terms of where I focus my energy throughout the day. Again, there will be exceptions to that rule, but generally most things that come into your inbox or into your Teams notifications aren't actually that urgent, don't need to be actioned straight away. You can take some time, you can consider your responses and do it at a time that makes sense for you as well. You're not going to miss out on anything by not having the notifications turned off. My favorite one that I've actually personally started to do this recently. If you wanted to create a physical border that will absolutely stop you from doing work, say you wanted to finish work at 5 p.m. In the afternoon, just pull the charger out of your laptop about 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2:30 in the afternoon. And you've almost got this countdown now of like how much battery life you have left until the workday actually finishes. And again, because the battery has died on your laptop when you get to 4:30 or 5 o'clock, it means you need to stop your work. You've kind of put this physical border in place and you can't really engage in work until you reconnect the charger or your laptop's charged up enough to actually engage in that work again. So again, a nice simple tactic you can use just to set a timer in terms of disconnecting yourself from work if you really wanted to get away from things, but you have a few little bits and pieces that you need to finish off for work as well. One of the really important things about this is like building that social capital or maintaining that social capital, so we can be seen as visible contributors to the workplace, contributing to our team, helping our organization achieve its goals and things like that. And the key thing here is to start to think about ways you can make your work visible to other people. Again, just working on some documents or working on some presentations at home in your home office, or working on the work that you need to do, but not documenting that work, not sharing your wins or sharing your challenges or sharing the journey that you're going through in creating that work, or the outcomes that you're achieving through that work, means that you might be missing out on opportunities to advance your career within your employer as well. So there's absolutely ways you can do that using the tools within Microsoft 365. So for example, if you have Yammer, or you have an enterprise social network within your organization, you could use some of the Yammer communities that you have to engage in conversation and make sure that you are visible within your workplace. Again, don't just spam the enterprise social network, but considered, thoughtful, valuable contributions to those communities will help you stand out, particularly when you can't see each other in the office day to day. If you're not using Yammer, or if you're just using Teams within your team, within your department, you can do that within Teams as well. Again, documenting your work, sharing your thoughts, sharing the lessons learned in terms of how you delivered your work or how you did the work. They're all really, really important conversations, and they give you the opportunity to elevate your visibility within the team and within the organization as well. You could consolidate some of your lessons learned into a SharePoint Online article, or a news article, or a post. So if you have SharePoint Online as an intranet, there's a great opportunity here to take some of the lessons learned of your project over the last 3 months, or the work that you've been doing, create that into an article that you can share with others in your organization using SharePoint Online, or using your intranet that you might have. I'm sure you've all got a Valo intranet in your organization, and will have a great ability to kind of broadcast some of this content or share some of this content with your peers as well. And then one other one, this one's an interesting one in terms of some people like this and some people don't like this. But remember, we're trying to reduce the amount of meetings that we have, but we want to maximize the impact of the meetings that we have. So whenever possible, we'd recommend that you do turn your video on during meetings and actually participate in meetings. It's very easy working from home to join a meeting, leave yourself on mute, turn the video off, and then just sit back and listen to the meeting, and sit back and relax along the way. And one of the things that we want to do is again, don't just interrupt the meeting all the time. Don't just say silly things in the meetings just to make sure you're heard all the time. But when you've got valuable contributions, or there's valuable questions you could ask, or valuable ways you can engage in the conversation, make sure you come off mute. Make sure you have your video on and actually engage with your peers, so they can see you doing the work and see that you're engaging and see that you're visible within the workplace as well. There is a lot of research in terms of building trust, and whether face-to-face conversations versus video-based conversations versus just audio-based conversations. And with video meetings, it actually it's pretty much almost the same as a face-to-face meeting in terms of the ability to create trust. It just takes a little bit longer to build those trusting bonds between people. So particularly if you haven't engaged with people in a face-to-face conversation before, making sure you do turn on video at least every now and then. If not all the time, it definitely can help you maintain and build that social capital that you have in the organization as well. Another thing you can do, it's a bot that was released by Microsoft maybe 6 months ago, or maybe a little bit longer than that, the Icebreaker Bot. So if you haven't seen this, it's basically an example of a bot that you can deploy into your organization. That every Tuesday at 6 o'clock in the morning, or 10 o'clock in the morning, or whenever you want it to be, will randomly select another person from your team and send a little introductory message to each other. So instead of you having to try and figure out who you want to talk to, or try and proactively engage with other people you might not have talked to before, the Icebreaker Bot will basically match you with someone in your organization for you to go and have a chat to. And it could be just a chat around what you did on the weekend, or it could be something work related as well. But that Icebreaker Bot will help break down some of the barriers between yourself and other people in your organization, other silos that might exist in your organization, and help you build those relationships and build that social capital with other people as well. So if you haven't had a look at Icebreaker, there's a tiny bit of effort to actually turn it on. So it's not the kind of thing that just a normal human being like myself, who isn't necessarily a deep technical person, could do. You'll need to talk to your systems administrators to turn this on. But again, it's a great little tool you can use to break the ice and engage with people that you might not normally engage with now, Or, it's a replacement for, going and randomly having lunch with someone in the office. Maybe you meet someone in the hallway and go have a conversation with them and have lunch with them. This is the same kind of thing, just in a digital sense from that point of view. And then the other thing is, we want to try and schedule unproductive time in our workday, and we want to try and replicate that water cooler or that lunchroom that we have. So, when we're working from home, we miss out on those opportunities to pause at morning tea time or at lunchtime to, when we're going to the coffee machine to get our coffee and have that 5-minute chat with people. So how do we actually schedule or program that into our work week so we can still have those kinds of interactions? One of my favorite ways to do that is at the start, maybe you have a formal team meeting every week or every fortnight, is you crack open a Teams meeting, everyone gets into Teams for your Teams meeting, everyone's got their video on and things like that. But before you get into their formal agenda of that team meeting, for the first 10 minutes of the meeting, don't spend time talking about work, spend time allowing the group to connect with each other. Now, that could just happen naturally through the conversations and people asking how their work is and things like that, and how their weekends have been, etc. But if you want a structured way to do that, one of the tips or tactics that we use is we just ask everyone in the group 2 questions. What was your biggest professional win in the last week? What was your biggest personal win in the last week? And as you go around your team, you'll hear, like Jeff, was out in his backyard and he's pruned a lot of his trees and he finally got all the weeds out of the backyard that he'd been working on for the last 3 months. So that was his personal win, but he also helped out a customer solve this really complex problem. So not only do we get to, build these relationships and understand the context of like the work that our team are doing, but we also get to hear a little bit more of the things that they've, the successes or the challenges they've faced in their personal lives as well. And it helps build that trust, helps build those connections between people as well. The other thing to do is to celebrate leave. My favorite Yammer community that we have, and we've had a lot of customers do this as well, is a Yammer community called No Leave, No Life. And what we encourage people to do is when you take leave, we don't want people just to be scared of taking leave or be afraid of taking leave. We want to celebrate leave and ensure people are taking breaks, getting away from their home offices and doing things. So one of the expectations we have on our team here at Adopt and Embrace is when you get back from your leave is, we want you to share photos, we want you to share the stories or the experiences, like what you saw, what you did, all those kinds of things that you'd want to share with us. So we can see, we can live through you and see how great it is to actually take some time off every now and then. Because that encourages other people to actively want to take that leave as well when their time is right for them. So you celebrate people taking leave and share the stories of the downtime as well. In terms of managing expectations, you really need to make sure that you and your team are on the same page in terms of remote work and distributed work and how that all works. And then how you're going to engage with tools like Teams, like what are the principles we're going to agree to in terms of whether, how often should I check this team? Are we going to mention people in every single post, or are we just going to mention people when we want them to actually take some action based off the post? And what does a like mean? Does a like mean that I've seen the message? Does it like mean that I've read and understood the message? Does it like mean I acknowledge the message? Does it like mean that I approve the message? Like these signals within Microsoft Teams can mean different things to different people. So we want to make sure that we're all clear as a group and what these things actually mean. And expectations in terms of how often we check, how often we engage in the space, are we joining via video or not, those kinds of things. Now, a great thing you can do is once you've had that conversation, you can document that as a tab within your team. And you could use either, if you want to use the wiki, you could use that. Probably wouldn't recommend using the wiki tab, but you can absolutely use things like a OneNote notebook and share that in there. You could share it in as a document or a PDF as a tab at the top of the screen. Or if you have a SharePoint Online site, or another, your intranet site on Valo and things like that, you can just link directly to that page and have that frame into your team as well. But you can have that documented so everyone in the team sees what the rules of the road are. And if anyone new joins your team in the future, they can see those shared expectations that have been shared and agreed to across the team as well. One other thing here about managing expectations, again, the expectations your manager has of you or the expectations you perceive your manager has a really big impact on your success or otherwise in terms of managing those work-life borders. So try and proactively engage with your manager, have a scheduled one-on-one where you can talk about your progress, talk about your roadblocks and things like that. Now, one of the great ways you can use Teams to set up this interaction is something we call an employee experience team. So it's a team of just 2 people. It's you and your manager, or you and your direct report. And you can create this team just to focus on your employment relationship and all the things that matter to you. So you can have a channel on learning and development. You can have a channel which is just your one-on-ones. You can have a channel which is like what is broken and what needs fixed. But what this employee experience team allows you to do is basically have a safe space where you can engage with your manager, engage in regular conversations, and make sure you've got this shared understanding of what each other's expectations are along the way. Everyone should be aware that within teams, within that team, within the channel, you can schedule a recurring meeting, just like you can schedule a recurring meeting in Outlook. So you might have a fortnightly one-on-one. Just set that up within the team, so you can have that the stream of consciousness of all the different one-on-one meetings that you've had within that team. Any conversations or follow-up, you can kind of have the conversation via the chat or the conversation within the team to get that there. Any actions that come out of your one-on-ones, that's a really great opportunity to have a plan set up, so you can put those actions and track those actions for yourself and for your manager as well within that one space. So a great opportunity to bring that all together. And if you wanted to take it to the next step, upload your employment contract or your terms and conditions of employment as files into that space. So you got everything in one nice little area to work with as well. And again, making sure that you talk about what your expectations are and making sure you understand what your manager's expectations are, irrespective of the technology, is a really, really important thing to help you make sure you can manage those borders effectively as well. So let's think about some next steps, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A, and I'm happy to hang around as long as we've got to answer questions on this. I think there's a few things that we need to all consider in terms of the distributed work and how we make it work for us, and how we can make Microsoft 365 work for us in terms of helping us maintain those work-life borders that we all need to kind of have control over. So the first thing is to consider what your new normal is. Now, we think back 3 or 4 months and we think about what work used to be like then. And there was certainly like some sacred cows or things that we all held really dear. Like we had to have a face-to-face meeting. We had to have our team come together and meet face-to-face. We had to meet face-to-face with customers, all these different things we just took for granted. So now we need to think about, as we've gone through the last 3 or 4 months, what have been the really great things that we want to keep a hold of, and what are the things that we could possibly not necessarily do anymore or remove from our lives, remove from our work lives. So we all need to consider what that looks like. And hopefully we're going to not just go back and revert to what it used to be, but we'll take those best bits and create an even better way of working. So think about what that is for you. Think about what that is for your team. Think about what that is for your organization as well. Have a discussion with your manager about this and maybe maintaining the flexibility long term. I know a lot definitely here in Australia, but I know this is happening in other countries and other cultures around the world. People that traditionally worked 5 days a week in an office are now thinking, hey, I actually like working from home a bit. I might only do 3 days from work, 3 days from the office and 2 days from home. So they're starting to think about like flexible work arrangements to make it work for them and their family as well as their employer. Again, thinking about your local country or your local government policies and things like that. Within Australia, we have a right to request flexible work arrangements, and I know in Europe there's definitely some legislation that's similar to that as well, which you have employers have an obligation to consider any requests for flexible work as well. So think about that in your own particular organisation or your own jurisdiction that you work in. Think about how those 3 borders that we talked about, the physical border, the temporal border, and the psychological border, kind of how you can better control those, or how you can think about those, and how you can control them not only to work for you, but work for your employer as well. I think a lot of times when we think about work-life balance, it's very much it has to work for us or it has to work for the employer. And it's almost like this, one or the other discussion. But the reality of it is completely different. I think we can all get to a point where it works really well for us as individuals, and it works really well for our employer at the same time, and we can both share the success that we have along the way with that too. I think we absolutely want to try and reduce the number of meetings that we have, and again, use text or use sharing files or use the conversations we can have within teams to reduce the amount of meetings we have. But when we do have meetings, try and maximize the impact of those meetings by turning video on, engaging in the conversation, using the raise hand feature within the meeting to try and ask questions or share perspectives or share experiences with each other as well. And then finally, Microsoft 365 has so much capability in it, and when you think about layering tools like Valo on top of it as well, you've got absolutely a huge opportunity to amplify your impact in this distributed world as well. So how can you make sure you use these tools at your fingertips to enable yourself to be an effective employee, but also effective human being that has plenty of time to do the things that you want to do, plenty of time to work with your family or engage with your family, play with your family, or manage your care responsibilities or things like that you might have. So some things to consider off the back of this presentation. Again, we kind of briefly touched on this in the presentation. We go into a little bit more detail within the book in terms of how you can structure teams to make this work for you, and how you can structure teams to make sure you're not as overwhelmed by all the notifications, or structure teams so you're not overwhelmed by a lot of the noise of how other people are using Teams, or how other people are using Teams. So if you want to dive a little bit more into that, go check out that book. It's available on Amazon or at teamsbook.info, and you can find a lot more information about it in there. But with that, what I'd love to do is open up to any questions or any comments or any perspectives you'd like to share. Again, I love it when people have alternative point of views or different point of views. That's why I love engaging in an audience that's mostly European for this call from Australia, because I get to hear perspectives that we don't normally hear here in Australia as well, and vice versa. So I'd love to have a conversation with you now if you've got any questions or comments with that. But otherwise, thank you for your time, and appreciate your attention today. Any questions or any comments?
Looks like people are very quiet today, Paul, but thank you for a really enjoyable and great session. So I learned a few tips and tricks myself. So because at least personally, I always struggle with that work-life balance, like how to connect and disconnect from the work, and, working from home like most of us is doing right now is even more challenging. So I really love that tip to just put your phone in the flight mode, and then you are kind of off from the world. So great session. And now is the time to talk with Paul. He's from Brisbane down under in Australia. So for him it's like soon 8 p.m. now. So take this chance. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to him. If not, also feel free to connect with Paul on Twitter, as he mentioned before, and also use the hashtag #AskValoFest. Then everybody else can also see your questions if you are not comfortable to go on mic. But Tracy is, hello Tracy, you raised your hand, coming in from South Africa, so feel free to unmute yourself.
I am. Hi there, Paul. I didn't catch all of your presentation, I do apologize, but I think something I wanted to just share together with what you said about work-life balance is that you're very right, is that so many times we think it's a employer versus employee thing, or a workplace versus a home place thing. And something that I realized, but of course through making lots of mistakes and nearly working myself to death, is that I find work-life balance in work and in home as well. So by putting more fun and creativity and enjoyment into the work that I do, I find balance in my workplace as well. I don't think we should be happy at home and miserable at work. If we can find that balance of really truly enjoying what we do and having a passion for what we do and living our dream and being truthful, then that work-life balance really comes to play as well, whether you're at work or busy with work or that type of thing. So I thought that was just something I wanted to share.
Yeah, spot on. I think we all have an opportunity to use that temporal border, so the time of work, to better manage that as well. So you absolutely get deep and enjoy your work, but you also want to spend time with your family as well. So there's nothing stopping us just stopping halfway through the day, spending that 30 minutes with our family, with our children, recharging, re-energizing from that home life or that family life, and then bringing that energy back into the workplace as well. So you kind of feed off both sides of that spectrum.
Yes.
To improve outcomes for everyone.
Absolutely.
All right, Mark Wright, feel free to unmute yourself again as well. You had a question?
Yeah, hi. Hello, Paul.
Hey, Mark.
Thanks very much for that presentation. Very interesting indeed. Paul, can you just tell us what your advice is in terms of the relationship between Teams and the new Yammer? What's your recommendation to organizations when they're a bit confused about the two of them?
Like a religious debate for some people, which can't be sit in. So for us, our philosophy is absolutely there is value in having a space where you can come together as an organization, as a community, and engage together and engage against across your common goals, your shared values, the direction that the organization is going in. It's not just the professional side of it, also the personal side of it as well. And we think that Yammer has a really great place to fit in that kind of conversation. So it's not the hard and fast work that we're doing every day. It's not the specific project we're working on, but as an organization of 10 people, 100 people, 10,000 people, it's a space for us to come together around common causes and common good, or common challenges or common problems that we want to face. There's no expectation of engagement, but it's a place where we can engage and go into that space. Teams, on the other hand, is a great place where we can get work done. We can focus on work. We can dive into work. We can collaborate and coordinate around specific shared challenges, have really clear problems we're trying to solve, really clear purposes that we're trying to achieve, potentially as smaller groups, but we have a space where that can actually live. So for us, there's absolutely value in both. The risk we run by trying to do it all in one tool is very much the same kind of philosophy that we had in the physical workplace as well. Imagine if you try to do all your meetings in a large training room. There's definitely different types of rooms that suit different types of conversations that you want to have. More intimate one-on-one conversations that you might have with your manager, for example, they're really good to have through a chat or through a one-on-one video call. When you have the conversations that you have with a group of people around you, maybe the 6 people at work in the cubicles around you, and you're working on the same projects and the same goals, a team is a great place for that kind of conversation to occur. If you want to stand up in front of your entire organization and have a conversation with them in terms of our values and the direction we want to go as an organization and our strategy, a Yammer community allows us to do that, but it also gives us the opportunity to have a few more fine-grained conversations in terms of different values, different initiatives or other things that we're thinking about as an organization. So we absolutely believe there's value in both. And the interesting thing is, if you get the community aspect of it right and the teamwork aspect of it right, that's when you'll find that email basically goes to zero internally. Mm-hmm. And for me, in a previous life, I was an internal communications manager, so I just love the dynamics of this communication and how it works. If you can have those 2 different spaces where you can engage, that's when email reduces. If you try and do it all in one space, the email won't reduce, because email becomes that default second space. It's kind of the catch-all for all of that stuff. So if your goal is to reduce email, reduce overwhelm of people's work, I think the real answer is having both. Don't fall into the trap of saying, hey, we can do an all organization team, therefore we don't need Yammer. Because I think there's a different, switching into a different context allows you to switch out of that work mode and into more of that community mode within your organization. I think that's really important to have that transition between the two.
Great, thank you very much. Very helpful.
No worries.
We still have time for 1 or 2 more questions if anyone has and want to just unmute themselves and ask Paul a question right now. So feel free to do that. Yeah, it looks like everybody just enjoyed your session like I did, Paul. So that's awesome.
Perfect.
Yeah. And thank you for taking the time, especially calling in from Australia late in the afternoon. Really enjoyable session. And I do hope I will see you in person one time, because I've been traveling a lot of times to, I've been traveling a lot to Australia. So, but thank you again for joining, and thank you everyone for being here for Paul's session. I will stop the recording now, and of course we will share the recording afterwards with everyone. And yeah, if you have more questions, feel free to jump to Twitter and just use the hashtag #AskValo Fest, and feel free to connect with Paul and go buy his book as well. So do that as well. So yeah, thank you again, Paul, and wish you a great evening, and we will continue to run this show.
Thank you for the invite, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Appreciate your attention. Thank you.